The moment the palace doors closed, the whispers began. Not the soft, polite murmurs of royal gossip that drift through London drawing rooms, but the kind of whispers that carry shock, betrayal, and the quiet feeling that something inside the House of Windsor had finally snapped. Because what happened behind those ancient walls wasn't just another royal disagreement. It was a line drawn in stone. And at the center of that storm stood one man, Prince William. The future king stepped forward in the historic halls of Windsor Castle, the towering ceilings echoing with centuries of royal power, and what he announced that morning would send tremors across the monarchy, across the media, and straight into the quiet hills of Montecito, where Prince Harry had been living his carefully constructed new life. But here's the twist no one saw coming. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about healing a family feud. This was about discipline. And the message William delivered was so cold, so calculated, that palace insiders would later describe the moment with one chilling phrase: the crown chose survival over blood. The hall inside Windsor Castle was silent that morning, cameras pointed forward, reporters holding their breath, and diplomats watching every movement of the heir to the throne. When William stepped up to the lectern, there was no hesitation in his voice, no emotional pause, just a firm declaration that sounded less like a speech and more like a verdict. He announced that the monarchy was entering what he called a new chapter, one defined not by sentiment, not by personal relationships, but by duty to the institution. And behind that statement was something far bigger than the public realized: a document, a powerful internal decree known as Royal Order Number 17. According to insiders, the order had been quietly drafted for months, reviewed by royal legal advisors, and discussed in secret meetings involving some of the most powerful figures inside the royal family: Princess Anne, Duchess Sophie, senior members of the Privy Council. What they created wasn't just policy, it was a royal reset button. And the first person caught in its crosshairs was Prince Harry. The order was blunt. Prince Harry would be barred indefinitely from returning to any official royal role. All privileges connected to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be suspended. Titles linked to institutional authority would be frozen. Access to royal representation would end. And the message behind it all was unmistakable. No exceptions, not even for the king's own son. But the bombshell didn't stop there. Because by the time this announcement echoed through the palace halls, Harry was already facing a personal storm that had been quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A confidential divorce from Meghan Markle finalized only weeks earlier, and with that separation came something far more explosive than heartbreak: a custody battle, a legal fight, and a flood of accusations that were beginning to spill into public view. Insiders claim the palace had been watching these developments carefully for months, monitoring legal filings, media negotiations, and business deals tied to the Sussex brand. Then came the document that changed everything: a confidential dossier submitted by Lady Louise Windsor, a young royal figure who had suddenly stepped into an unexpected role inside the monarchy's legal network. The file was massive, more than 100 pages, and according to those familiar with its contents, it contained troubling details about how Prince Harry and Meghan's children, Archie and Lilibet, were being presented in commercial agreements and media partnerships. There were licensing discussions, brand negotiations, and alleged inconsistencies in official documentation tied to the children's records. What had once been dismissed as tabloid rumors was now sitting in front of royal legal advisors as a serious institutional concern. And suddenly, the issue wasn't just family drama anymore. It had become something far more complicated: a constitutional dilemma. One senior royal advisor reportedly said the situation had crossed a line that the monarchy simply could not ignore. Because when children connected to the royal bloodline become part of media deals, brand licensing, or international legal disputes, the consequences extend far beyond one family. They reach into the very legitimacy of the crown itself. That realization triggered a chain reaction inside the palace: emergency legal consultations, private tribunal discussions, and a plan that would soon shock even the most seasoned royal observers. William's speech that morning was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, a new constitutional mechanism was quietly being introduced, something the monarchy had never used before in the modern era: a system known internally as royal matrons. Under this structure, two senior royal figures would act as protective overseers for Archie and Lilibet's welfare, education, and digital identity. And the names chosen for that responsibility carried enormous weight: Princess Catherine, Duchess Sophie. Their role would not involve daily parenting or custody control. Instead, they would function as guardians of the children's royal connection, ensuring their identities and public presence could not be exploited or misused in legal battles or entertainment ventures. It was a move that stunned constitutional experts because it effectively merely placed a protective shield between the children and the increasingly chaotic disputes surrounding their parents. During private discussions inside the royal tribunal, Catherine reportedly made her stance clear. "This is not punishment," she said quietly. "It is protection." But across the Atlantic Ocean, in the quiet California enclave of Montecito, the situation was spiraling in an entirely different direction. Harry, already exhausted by months of legal tension, reportedly reached out privately to Catherine's advisors with a desperate question. If he stepped away from the custody fight, if he allowed the royal guardianship structure to move forward, would the palace finally stop the escalating conflict? Would it allow the divorce records and legal battles to remain sealed? One insider described Harry's message as heartbreaking. "If letting go keeps them safe, I'll do it." But the moment that proposal surfaced, Meghan's legal team immediately intervened. They filed objections. They challenged the monarchy's authority, and they made it clear that any attempt to shift guardianship without Meghan's consent would be fought aggressively in court. Suddenly, the dispute wasn't confined to the quiet halls of Windsor anymore. It was expanding into an international legal battlefield. London, California, possibly even The Hague. Royal advisors began preparing for the kind of transatlantic legal clash the monarchy had never faced before. Yet through it all, Prince William remained outwardly calm, cold even. When reporters later asked palace insiders about his demeanor during those intense discussions, one aide described it in a way that sent chills through royal watchers. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He was decisive. And that decisiveness was beginning to reshape the monarchy itself. Approval ratings for William surged across the United Kingdom. Newspapers framed his actions as proof that the future king was willing to prioritize institutional stability over personal relationships. Editorial columns called it the Windsor Doctrine, a strategy for the post-Elizabethan monarchy where discipline and accountability would take precedence over family loyalty. For some observers, it felt like the beginning of a new royal era. For others, it felt like the most brutal internal conflict the House of Windsor had faced in generations. Because while William was consolidating authority inside the palace, Prince Harry was sitting alone in Montecito, staring at the official decree on his tablet screen. The words were short, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. The monarchy would not bend, the crown would not compromise, and until certain legal conditions surrounding his children were resolved, there would be no path back. Sources close to Harry later described the moment as devastating. He reportedly sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. No phone calls, no messages, just the quiet realization that the life he once knew, the ceremonies, the royal protection, the sense of belonging inside the institution he had been born into had finally slipped beyond reach. But what Harry didn't yet realize was that the storm surrounding the monarchy was only just beginning. Because inside Buckingham Palace, behind sealed doors and guarded corridors, phase 2 of the royal strategy was already moving forward. And the consequences of that next move would shake the royal family even further. If the first announcement shook the monarchy, what came next sent a shockwave straight through the heart of the royal family. Because the palace wasn't finished, not even close. Behind the scenes, while headlines across the world were exploding with speculation about Prince Harry's exile from royal duties, something far more dramatic was quietly unfolding inside Buckingham Palace. A new legal structure, a new tribunal, and a new doctrine that insiders were already calling the Windsor Line. It began with a closed meeting between King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and several senior constitutional advisors. No press, no leaks, just a quiet gathering inside one of the palace's most secure chambers. But what was discussed in that room would soon ripple across the monarchy like a thunderclap, because the question on the table was no longer simply about Harry's role within the royal family. The real question was far more explosive. What would happen to Archie and Lilibet? For months, royal legal teams had been reviewing documents connected to the children's status, citizenship records, education arrangements, media appearances, and even digital licensing agreements tied to their names. And what they discovered raised concerns that went far beyond tabloid gossip. There were inconsistencies, gaps in official filings, unanswered questions about guardianship and legal jurisdiction between the United Kingdom and the United States. To the public, it may have looked like a family dispute, but to constitutional lawyers advising the crown, it looked like a potential institutional crisis. And that's when Prince William made the decision that would redefine the situation entirely. He approved the creation of something unprecedented in modern royal history, a royal family tribunal, not a public court, not a political body, but an internal sovereign authority empowered to rule on matters involving royal titles, succession rights, and the welfare of royal descendants. When word of the tribunal quietly reached government officials, even seasoned palace watchers were stunned, because historically the monarchy had avoided creating formal structures chambers to adjudicate family conflicts. Royal disagreements were handled privately behind closed doors. But this time was different. This time, the monarchy wasn't simply reacting to scandal. It was building a firewall, and at the center of that firewall stood Prince William. During one tense discussion with advisors, William reportedly referenced a warning his grandmother had given years earlier. Queen Elizabeth II had once told him that the greatest threat to the monarchy wasn't public criticism, it was internal weakness. A monarchy that hesitated to protect its own structure could eventually lose the trust of the nation it represented, and that was something William had no intention of allowing. So when the tribunal convened for the first time, the stakes were enormous. Senior members of the Privy Council were present, legal scholars, royal household advisors, and several family representatives who had quietly prepared for this moment for months. Princess Anne had been one of the key architects behind the framework. Her reputation inside the palace was legendary, sharp, disciplined, and utterly loyal to the institution. To her, the issue was simple. If royal lineage could be used as a tool in commercial deals, custody battles, or media negotiations, then the monarchy had to create rules strong enough to prevent that. One royal aide later described Anne's position bluntly: "The line must exist. Without it, the institution dissolves." The tribunal's discussions were intense. They examined every aspect of the Sussex situation: public branding tied to the children, documentary deals, legal filings, and the broader implications for royal succession. And slowly, a new legal principle began to take shape, a rarely used safeguard known as the Lineage Protection Clause. Originally developed in the early 20th century after the abdication crisis involving Edward VIII, the clause granted the sovereign the authority to temporarily suspend royal privileges for descendants whose circumstances created constitutional uncertainty. The mechanism had almost never been used until now. After hours of deliberation, the tribunal reached a decision that would ripple through royal history. Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor would have their royal entitlements paused. But if royal history has taught the world anything, it's that the House of Windsor rarely tells its entire story at once. And as new leaks, legal battles, and political tensions continue to swirl around the Sussex saga, one thing remains certain: the crown may move slowly, but when it decides to act, it never forgets.